Take your hands off her, now!
You have no idea who you are speaking to.
I know exactly who you are. That is why I am only saying this once.
Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I can do to you? What?
Walk away from this street tonight. That offer expires in 10 seconds.
Walk away, now.
This is not finished.
Yes, it is.
Get your hands off me. Emika's grip tightened. She was already inside the car, already fighting, her fingers clawing at his hand, her whole body pulling away from the door he was dragging her toward. The rain was coming down in sheets outside. The Seoul street was empty. Nobody was coming for her. Nobody ever came. Naomi. His voice was soft. That softness. That was always the most terrifying thing about him. Not the anger. The anger was almost a relief because at least it was honest. It was the softness that destroyed her. Come out of the car. Right now. Let go of me. You are embarrassing yourself. He leaned into the door frame, his grip moving from her wrist up to her arm, pulling with the slow, grinding patience of a man who had never once needed to rush, because he had never once in his life not gotten what he wanted. We are going home. Tonight. Both of us. She kicked, hard. Her heel connected with his forearm and he grunted, but the grip did not break. It never broke. That was what 3 years had taught her about Emika. He did not lose his temper. He did not raise his voice. He simply held on and held on and held on until you exhausted yourself and he was still there. Still calm. Still holding. Stop fighting me. His voice dropped lower now. The register she knew better than any sound in the world. The one that meant the patience was almost finished. Come out of this car right now, or I promise you, you will regret the moment you decided to run from me. He paused. And you know I keep my promises. Don't you, baby? She did. God help her, she did. She opened her mouth. And a voice came from the dark of the back seat. Low, quiet. So still it didn't even disturb the air. Remove your hands from her. Everything stopped. Naomi stopped pulling. Emika stopped dragging. Even the rain outside seemed to hold itself for half a second, as if the city too had heard something it needed to pay attention to. Because that voice carried something in it that volume could never carry. It did not need to be loud. It landed the way a blade lands. Not with noise, with certainty. The absolute certainty of a man who had never in his life needed to say anything twice. Emika's grip on her arm loosened, just slightly, involuntarily. His body responding before his mind had caught up. She turned her head slowly toward the far corner of the back seat, and she saw him. He was sitting completely still, one arm resting along the back of the seat. Dark eyes, sharp jaw, tattoos running up both forearms and crawling up the left side of his neck, and cutting through his dark hair, a single streak of blonde, catching the streetlight through the tinted glass like a signature, like something that had always been specifically, and only his. He was not looking at her. He was looking at Emika, and his face had nothing on it. No anger, no threat, no performance of any kind. Just the flat absolute calm of a man who had already decided what happens next and felt nothing particular about it. The face of a man for whom this, all of this, was simply a situation being resolved. Emeka's grip loosened another fraction, and that was when Naomi understood something that rearranged everything she thought she knew about the last 3 minutes. Emika was afraid. Emika, who had never flinched at anything, who had walked into rooms full of powerful men and made them feel small without raising his voice, who had looked at her fear for 3 years, like it was something she was doing to him, was afraid of the man sitting in this back seat. Emeka reached slowly into his jacket with his free hand, and the man in the back seat moved. Wherever you are watching this, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far a story about a woman who ran from a wedding she never chose, landed in a city that was not hers, and ended up in the back of the wrong car on the right night, can travel. And if this story found you at a moment when you needed to be, reminded that your life can still belong to you, that it can start over when you least expect it, in the backseat of a stranger's car in Seoul, in a dress you wore to escape and not to arrive, on a night when you were just trying to breathe, then you already know you need to stay for what comes next. subscribe, because this is only the beginning. Sung-ho came across that back seat like the decision had already been made before Emeka's hand cleared his jacket. No warning, no words, just movement, clean, deliberate, surgical. His hand locked around Emeka's wrist and twisted, and the sound that tore out of Emeka was short and involuntary and raw. The grip on Naomi's arm broke entirely. She threw herself back against the far door. But Sung-ho wasn't finished. He stepped out of the car in one motion, and the street outside changed instantly. 4 of his men came out of the shadows between the parked vehicles, appearing from nowhere, from everywhere, from the dark spaces Naomi had run past without seeing. Emeka's 2 men moved forward and then stopped, because what they were looking at did not add up in their favor, and their bodies understood it before their minds finished the calculation. Emeka turned to face Sung-ho on the wet pavement, rain coming down between them, his wrist hanging at an angle it had not been hanging at 60 seconds ago. His composed expression back in place but cracked at the edges now. Cracked in a way Naomi had never seen from him. Not once. "Do you know who I am?" Emeka said. The last card. The only card he had left. Sung-ho stood in the rain without an umbrella, and without any apparent awareness of the rain, and looked at Emeka the way a mountain looks at weather. "I know exactly who you are," he said. "That is why I am giving you the option to walk away from this street tonight." He paused. That option is expiring. Emeka's jaw tightened. His eyes moved past Sung-ho to the car window where Naomi was watching from the back seat. He looked at her for a long moment. The look that had always been its own kind of sentence. The look that said, "You belong to me regardless of where you run." She held his gaze. She did not look away. She had spent 3 years looking away, and she was finished with it. She held his eyes with everything she had and let him see, clearly and completely and without apology, that she was not coming back. Not in any version of tonight that existed in any world. Something moved across his face. Not hurt. Emeka did not do hurt. Something colder. Something patient. Something that said this conversation is being paused, not ended. He stepped back. Sung-ho returned to the car. He got into the back seat and closed the door. And the car moved. And the street where Emeka was standing disappeared into the rain behind them. Naomi sat pressed against the far door with her bruised arm and her torn dress, and her heart slamming against her ribs. She stared at the seat in front of her and breathed, just breathed, one breath at a time, the way she had learned to breathe through the moments that tried to swallow her whole. Seoul moved past the windows in rivers of light and water. She turned towards Sung-ho. He was already looking at her. He had been looking at her the whole time. She had the feeling he had been looking at her since the moment she fell into his car. "Who are you?" Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to. "John Sung-ho," said the way a man states a coordinate, a fixed point, something that does not move. He held her gaze. "This is my car." "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't see anyone inside. I was..." She stopped. She was not going to explain herself. She was done explaining herself to men. "I'm sorry," she said again. "That is all." He looked at her wrist. The bruising was already dark against her skin. He looked at it the way he seemed to look at everything. Completely, without missing anything, without pretending not to see what was there. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." He looked at her face, the dark eyes reading her with the specific patience of a man who knew the gap between what people said and what was true, and was comfortable waiting in that gap. He did not argue, but his silence said he had noted it. "Where do you live?" he said. "I can't go back there. He knows the address." She pressed her lips together. "I have been in this city for 5 hours. I came from Lagos this morning." She stopped herself before the full weight of it could come out. "I will figure it out." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave the driver an address. Calm, final, like a man who had made a calculation and arrived at the only answer that made sense and had no conflict about it. "What are you doing?" "Taking you somewhere safe," he said. "Tonight." She studied him the way she had learned to study men who offered her things. looking for the gap between the offer and what it actually cost. She looked at the streak of blonde in his dark hair, the tattoos, the jaw, the face that had not changed expression once through any of this. She found nothing that frightened her, which was either the best news she had received in years or the most dangerous. "I don't know you," she said. "No, you don't know me." "No." He looked at the road briefly, then back at her. "But I know what I watched him do to you through that car door." He paused. "That is enough for tonight." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to the window. She did not ask him to stop the car. The apartment was on the 19th floor of a building in Gangnam that did not need a sign outside. The elevator opened directly into the space, and the space was vast and dark furnished, with floor-to-ceiling windows through which Seoul at midnight spread itself in every direction. All distance and light, and the indifferent beauty of a city that does not stop for anyone. No photographs, no clutter, nothing present that was not deliberate. An older woman appeared from the hallway. She looked at Naomi with the careful, neutral assessment of someone who had long ago moved past being surprised by anything. Sung-ho spoke to her briefly in Korean. She nodded once and looked at Naomi again, differently this time. Something had shifted, not warmth, but the space just beside it. "She will show you the guest room," Sung-ho said. "Everything you need is there." He paused at the hallway entrance without turning fully. "Do not open the front door for anyone who does not come through me." "You're very calm," Naomi said, "about all of this." He turned just enough that she could see the line of his jaw, the tattoos at his neck, the streak of blonde catching the apartment light. "I am always calm," he said, and he was gone. And Naomi stood in the center of that vast, still apartment and felt everything from the last 6 hours arrive in her body at once. The wedding dress she had left on a hotel bathroom door at 4 a.m, the flight, the rain, Amika's hand on her arm, the sound of his wrist in the dark. She did not cry. She followed the older woman to the guest room and lay in the dark and breathed until her hands stopped shaking and her heartbeat came down from wherever it had gone. She didn't sleep well, but she slept. Morning came pale through the curtains. Naomi sat up, pressed both feet flat to the floor, and held herself there until she was certain of her own steadiness. Then she followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen and found Sung-ho at the counter, phone in one hand, cup in the other, reading something with the focused stillness of a man who receives difficult information the way stone receives rain, without drama, without resistance, completely. Dark shirt, sleeves pushed up, the tattoos on his forearms in the morning light. He looked up when she walked in. One full look, the kind that took everything in and gave nothing back. "There is coffee," he said. She poured herself a cup and stood at the opposite side of the island, and they were quiet in the specific way of two people, deciding how much of themselves to put on the table. "I owe you an explanation," she said. He said nothing. He listened the way almost nobody actually listens, not preparing a response, not managing his reaction, just fully present and receiving. She told him about Amika, about Lagos, about the way it started, the way it always starts with men like that, with a man who looks across a room and makes you feel like the most chosen thing in it. She told him how long it had taken her to understand what she was actually inside of. She told him about Chisholm, her younger sister, 19 years old, still in the family house in Lagos, already being positioned by their father for the same kind of arrangement. Chisholm was the reason the recordings existed, the reason she had spent 8 months appearing to plan a wedding while building a case. The drive sewn into the lining of her bag contained everything. Every conversation, every threat wrapped in tenderness, every moment she had been told that the life being designed for her without her consent was a gift she should be grateful for. "I came to Seoul because 12,000 kilometers felt like enough distance to finally breathe," she said. She paused. "I was wrong." Sung-ho set his cup down slowly. "The name," he said. "The person Emeka is connected to here. Did you ever see a name?" She looked at him. On his laptop, about 8 months before I left. He had left a document open, a face I didn't recognize, numbers, and a name. He waited, absolutely still. "Kwon," she said. Kwon Taijun. The kitchen went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of sound. Sung-ho placed his cup on the counter with a deliberateness that told her everything his face was not showing. He looked at her, and something in his stillness shifted. Not colder, not warmer, but deeper. Like a man feeling the difference in weight between suspecting something and knowing it. Say that again. Kwon Taejun. He turned from the counter and walked to the window and stood with his back to her. She watched his shoulders. The way the stillness in them was not emptiness but weight. Kwon Taejun is my rival, he said finally. We have been moving toward open conflict for 2 years. He recently took financial records from inside my organization. Records that in the wrong hands will dismantle everything I have built. He turned back. His jaw was tight. Your ex did not follow you to Seoul on obsession alone. Someone gave his obsession a direction. Someone pointed him at you, and pointed you directly at me. The full shape of it arrived in her slowly. Then all at once. She had not only been running from her past. She had been a piece moved across a board by men who had not told her she was in the game. The man she had spent over a year escaping had been someone else's instrument. And she had been the blade, aimed at the man standing in front of her. So I was used, she said. Someone used both of us. That is not the same as being responsible for it. She pressed her lips together. The thing behind her eyes that she had been holding back for longer than she could measure, pushed forward hard. She held it. She was not falling apart in this kitchen. Not here. What do you need from me, she asked. He looked at her carefully. There is a dinner tonight. High level. People who will report back to Taejun exactly what they observed. I need someone beside me who is convincing and who does not break under that kind of pressure. You want me to be your girlfriend. I want an arrangement that protects us both. He paused. You stay here. Emeka cannot reach you while you are under my name. That is not nothing. It isn't, she agreed. But I have terms. No treating me like a prop. No making decisions for me without me. No making me less than what I am. She held his eyes. Those are not negotiable. Something moved in his expression, the space just beside where a smile would live. The door that was not opening but had just realized it. Could. Agreed, he said. That was the deal. Neither of them understood yet what it would cost them. Not in danger, not in strategy, but in all the ways that two careful people who have both been broken before pay for letting someone pass the wall. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. He looked at it. Something shifted in his expression. The specific tightening that meant the information was not good. He answered. He spoke in Korean. Brief. Sharp. When he hung up, he looked at her directly. Emeka is still in Seoul, he said. He has contacted 3 of my rivals since last night. He is building a picture of where I am weak. He paused. That picture now includes you. She held his gaze. So he is not just coming for me anymore. No. He is being pointed. Someone is directing him. The same person who directed him here in the first place. Sung-ho looked at the city through the window. The war is closer than it was yesterday. He looked back at her. Which means tonight matters more than I told you. She straightened. Then we had better make sure tonight counts. He looked at her for a long moment. The streak of blonde. The jaw. The eyes that were taking a new reading of her. Yes, he said quietly. We had better. By late afternoon, the guest room wardrobe had produced a midnight blue dress that fit Naomi like it had been made with her specific measurements in mind. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself for a long moment. The woman looking back she was still herself. She had been afraid for so long that she sometimes forgot she was still in there. Still whole. Still present. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and breathed. Still here, she told the woman in the mirror. Still here. When she walked into the living room, Sung-ho was already dressed. Dark suit, white shirt open at the collar, the tattoos visible at his neck, the streak of blonde in his dark hair. He turned when he heard her footsteps and he looked at her, and something moved across his face so fast, she almost missed it. Something that tightened his jaw, and then was gone, and then was controlled back under. with the precision of a man who had spent years making sure his face never said more than he intended. He looked at her, the way people look at things they were not prepared for. "You play violin," he said. She blinked. "How do you— I read your background when you were in the guest room." He paused. "I needed to know who I was bringing into my home." She looked at him. That should have felt like a violation. The fact that it didn't told her something about the way he had said it. Not possessively, not as control, but as the statement of a man who considered knowing the people in his orbit a responsibility rather than a right. "I used to," she said. "Why did you stop?" She met his eyes. "Because someone convinced me I was too much when I played, that I disappeared into it, that it made me unavailable." She paused, and I believed him. For a long time I believed him. Sung-ho was quiet for a moment. Then he walked to a door she had not noticed off the living room and opened it. Inside was a room she had not been shown, and against the wall, a violin. Dark wood. Beautiful. Not new. He looked at her. "It was my mother's," he said. "You can play it while you are here, if you want." She stared at him, at the violin, at the man who had just offered her the most significant thing in his possession, with the same quietness with which he did everything else. She did not trust herself to speak for a moment. "Why?" she said finally. "Because you should not have put it down," he said. "And because whatever he told you about yourself when you played, he was wrong." She looked at him for a long moment. The streak of blonde, the tattoos, the face that had just said the truest, most carefully placed thing anyone had said to her in 4 years, and had said it like it was simply and obviously true. The thing in her chest shifted, deeper this time, less like a door in a draft and more like something deciding. She looked away before he could see it fully. "We should go," she said. "Yes," he said, and neither of them moved for exactly 1 more second. Then they went. The dinner was in Cheongdam, a private room above a restaurant with no name outside, and an interior that cost more than most people's entire lives. The kind of room where everyone was performing ease so fluently, it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. Naomi entered on Sung-ho's arm, and the room did what rooms did when she walked in. It paused. Just a beat. Just long enough for every conversation to briefly lose its thread before finding it again. She was that kind of beautiful. The kind that arrived quietly and rearranged everything before anyone understood what had happened. She let them look. She was finished with making herself small. Sung-ho kept his hand at the small of her back from the first step inside, and she was aware of it with a precision that she found inconvenient and entirely impossible to dismiss. It was professional. It was the architecture of what they had agreed to. She knew that, and still, the warmth of it, the deliberate steady weight of it, moved through her and refused to be filed away as nothing. They moved through the room like two people who had chosen each other a long time ago. She laughed when laughter was required, leaned into him when closeness was the message, held her glass with the ease of a woman who had always belonged in rooms like this. At one point, Sung-ho leaned down to speak into her ear, just the name and background of a man across the room, and his voice was low and warm against the side of her face, and she kept her expression completely still and told herself very firmly that she felt nothing about it. She was not convincing herself. "You are extraordinary at this," he said quietly, when they found a moment near the windows. She looked at the city instead of at him. "I grew up reading rooms, reading people, knowing what they needed to believe about themselves and giving it to them." She paused. It was the only way to stay safe for a long time. He was quiet beside her. Then, "You don't have to do that here." She turned and looked at him. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes. "You don't have to manage me. You don't have to read what I need and perform it. You can just be exactly what you are." She stared at him. Something in her chest cracked open slightly. Not dramatically. Just a small clean break. Like the first light coming through a wall that had been solid for a very long time. She looked away before it showed on her face. Then Kwon Tae-jun walked into the room and every molecule of air shifted. She felt Sung-ho register him, the almost imperceptible tension moving through him like a current controlled back under, before it reached the surface. She followed his gaze across the room. Taejin was tall, dressed with the precise deliberateness of a man who understood that appearance was its own kind of power, handsome in a way that announced itself and expected recognition. Tattoos at his forearms and collarbone. He moved through the room like a man who had never once been told to make himself smaller, and had no memory of what that would feel like. When his eyes found Sungho, they held. The silent, compressed exchange of two men who had been circling each other for 2 years, without drawing blood. Then his eyes moved to Naomi, and stopped. The quality of his attention was different from Sungho's. Sungho's attention was interior, deep, still, like a body of water that went all the way down. Taejin's was deliberate and exterior and said, "I see you. I want you to know that I do." Sungho's thumb made one slow circle at the small of her back. Just one. She felt it move through her entire spine. Taejin crossed the room toward them. Sungho. The warmth in his voice was performed with the skill of someone who had been doing it so long the line between real and constructed had blurred. "Imagine seeing you here." "I go where I choose," Sungho said. Taejin's eyes moved to Naomi, and the smile that arrived was slower and more genuine than the one he had given Sungho. "And you are, Naomi," she said. Before Sungho could speak, "Taejin." He extended his hand. His grip held one beat past what was necessary. She noted it without reacting. "Nigerian?" "Yes," she said pleasantly. His smile deepened. He looked briefly at Sungho, then back to her. "Any woman who chooses Sungho has chosen something complicated," he said. "I hope you know what you are inside of." She looked at him steadily. "I always know exactly where I am," she said. Something moved in Taejun's face, not the reaction he had expected. He looked at her with a different quality of attention now, recalibrating, like a man who had walked into a room expecting furniture and found something that looked back. "We should find our table," Sungho said. His hand moved from the small of her back to her waist, fully, with a pressure that was no longer professional and did not pretend to be. Taejin watched them walk away. She could feel his eyes the whole way across the room. "He knew we would be here tonight," she said under her breath. "Yes," Sungho said. "He came because of me, not you." His jaw tightened. "Don't give him anything. No reaction, no interest. You are mine tonight." She glanced up at him. She caught the way he had said it, the specific weight of it. Mine. Not mine for the performance. Just mine. He was looking straight ahead. She looked straight ahead too. The evening deepened. Course after course. Conversation after carefully managed conversation. And Naomi moved through all of it with the ease of a woman who had spent her whole life learning to read the room beneath the room. Twice during dinner, she felt Taejin watching her from across the room. Both times she did not look back. Both times Sungho found her hand under the table without interrupting his conversation. Briefly, specifically, the way you hold something you are not willing to leave unattended. She told herself it was part of the arrangement. She told herself that with decreasing conviction each time. Then near the end of the first course, Taejin appeared beside her. Not beside Sungho, beside her. He had moved through the room with the specific ease of a man who had planned his route before he arrived, and was executing it now while Sungho was engaged in conversation on her other side, with a man who clearly required his full attention. "May I?" he said. He indicated the empty seat beside her that the previous guest had just vacated. She looked at him. She looked at the seat. She looked at Sungho, who had not yet noticed. "Please," she said pleasantly. He sat. He poured himself a glass from the bottle at the table with the ease of a man who made himself at home in any room without asking permission. He looked at her directly. "You are not what I expected," he said. His voice was low. "Just for her." "What did you expect?" she said. "Someone who needed the arrangement more than she was willing to admit." He held her gaze. "Someone who would be afraid in a room like this." He paused. "You are not afraid of anything in this room." She met his eyes steadily. "I have been afraid of much worse," she said. "This room is easy." He smiled. Slowly. Genuinely. The specific smile of a man who has just received an answer that interested him more than he planned to be interested. "Tell me something true," he said. "About yourself." Not the performance. The real thing. She looked at him, at the handsome face, at the tattoos at his collarbone, at the eyes that were warm and specific, and giving her the specific quality of attention that she had spent years being starved of and had learned to be careful of exactly because of that starvation. She felt it. She was honest enough with herself to feel it. The specific pull of a man who looked at you like you were worth looking at, who asked questions that wanted real answers. She also knew exactly what it was. She had read the document on Amika's laptop. She knew what this man was. She knew what this attention was built for, and yet, she held his gaze for one moment longer than was strictly necessary. Sung-ho's hand landed on her shoulder from behind. Not her back, her shoulder. His hand, specific and immediate and entirely deliberate. She felt the difference between the two men in that single second. The way Taijin's attention made her feel seen. The way Sung-ho's hand on her shoulder made her feel found. "Taijin," he said, his voice quiet. The edge in it so precisely placed that only someone sitting at this table would have felt it. Taijin looked up at Sung-ho. Something passed between them. Brief. Loaded. Then Taijin stood. He looked at Naomi one more time, his eyes holding hers for exactly 1 second. "Another time," he said quietly. He said it only to her. And he walked away. Sung-ho sat back down beside her. He did not speak for a moment. She could feel the tension, in him, controlled, precise, barely visible but entirely present. She picked up her glass and took a slow sip and looked at the room and said nothing. "He was testing you," Sung-ho said finally, his voice low. She looked at him. "I know." He looked at her. "Did it work?" She met his eyes directly. She held his gaze with the specific steadiness of a woman who had just answered that question for herself in real time, and knew what the answer was. "No," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then his hand came under the table and found hers and held it. Not briefly this time. He held it and did not let go for the rest of the dinner, and she let him, and neither of them said anything else about it. But she did not pretend she had felt nothing. She filed it, carefully, in the place where she kept the things that required honesty. She would deal with it later. It was near the end of the evening when everything escalated. She had stepped away from the table to find the restroom. A long corridor, empty. The sounds of the dinner muffled behind her, then footsteps behind her. She turned. 2 men, not from the dinner. The kind of men who appeared in corridors and were not there by coincidence. Emika's men. She recognized the face of the one on the left from Lagos. "Hello, Naomi," the one on the left said. "Emika wants to see you." She stepped back. Her back met the wall. She opened her mouth, and then Sung-ho was there. She did not see where he came from. She did not hear him coming. He was simply there, standing between her and the 2 men with the complete weightless calm of someone who had already run the calculation and found the answer straightforward. "She is not going anywhere with you," he said. The man on the left reached inside his jacket. Sung-ho moved. What happened in the next 10 seconds was not a fight in the way that word is usually understood. It was faster than a fight. It was more precise. Sung-ho took the first man's reaching arm, redirected it, and used the man's own momentum to put him into the wall face first. The sound the wall made was considerable. The sound the man made was brief and then absent. He slid to the floor and stayed there. The second man swung. Sung-ho stepped inside the swing, barely moving, just enough. And 2 strikes, fast and exact. And the second man was on the floor beside the first, with his eyes trying to remember what they were supposed to be doing. Silence in the corridor. Sung-ho straightened his jacket. He turned to Naomi. She was pressed against the wall, breathing, her eyes on him. He crossed to her. He stood in front of her and looked at her face, reading her the way he always read her, completely, without missing anything. "Are you hurt?" "No." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "How did you know I had left the table?" "I always know where you are," he said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She stared at him. He reached up and his hand came to the side of her face, just his fingers, gentle, tilting her face slightly toward the light to check her. Making sure. His touch was careful and specific and entirely focused on whether she was whole. And she stopped breathing. Because his hand on her face was not the hand of a man performing an arrangement. It was the hand of a man who had been frightened, truly, quietly frightened, that she might have been hurt, and was only now, with his fingers against her cheek, allowing himself to feel the relief of finding her whole. His eyes came to hers. Close now. The dark eyes and the streak of blonde and the jaw and the tattoos and all of it. Close. Neither of them moved. The corridor was completely quiet around them. The sounds of the dinner far away. Just the two of them, and the narrow space between them that was getting smaller, without either of them deciding to make it smaller. His thumb moved. Once. Slowly. Against her cheekbone. She felt it everywhere. And in the back of her mind, filed, carefully in its place, the memory of Taejin's eyes holding hers for 1 second too long. The way she had felt seen. The way she had been honest enough to feel it. And the way she understood now completely and without any remaining confusion. That what she felt in this corridor was different from that. Was deeper than that. Was the difference between being seen by someone who was looking for what they could use and being found by someone who was looking for what was actually there. Sung-ho, she said. His name. Just his name. But in the way she said it, quiet, a little unsteady, more honest than she had intended, it carried everything she had been carefully not saying since the moment she fell into his car. He looked at her. And the wall, the one she had been watching for days, the one he kept everything behind, developed a crack in it, right down the center. Just for a moment. Just long enough for her to see what was behind it. He was not calm about her. He had never been calm about her. His head dipped, just slightly. His eyes dropped to her mouth. Just for a second. Just long enough. And then footsteps at the end of the corridor. He stepped back. The wall sealed itself back up. He turned toward the approaching sound, and she pressed herself straight against the wall behind him, and breathed. One of his men appeared at the corridor entrance, spoke in Korean. Quickly. Sung-ho answered. 2 words, his voice even and controlled, and giving nothing. The man nodded and went back. Sung-ho turned to her. We need to go. Now. Taejun's men are also in the building. She nodded. She pushed off the wall. She straightened her dress and her spine and every single thing about herself that his thumb against her cheekbone had made temporarily unsteady. They walked back through the corridor, and Sung-ho's hand came to the small of her back, and the touch was different now from how it had been at the beginning of the evening. Everything was different now from how it had been at the beginning of the evening, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said it. The car was waiting outside. They got in. The city moved past the windows. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then, Taejin sent those men, he said. She looked at him. Not Amika. Both. He looked straight ahead. Taejin reached Amika. They are coordinating. He paused. Taejin wants the recordings on your drive. He knows they exist, Amika told him. She felt the cold of it move through her. He knows about Chisholm. If Taejin gets those recordings. He won't, Sung-ho said. The certainty in his voice left no room for the alternative. She looked at his profile. The jaw. The streak of blonde catching the passing city lights. How can you be sure, she said. He turned and looked at her, his eyes in the dark of the car. Because, he said quietly, you are under my name, and nothing under my name gets touched. He held her gaze. Nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away, at the city, and pressed her lips together against everything she was feeling, and told herself one more time, very firmly, very clearly, with everything she had, that she was not falling for the man sitting next to her. The city kept moving past the window. She was not convincing herself at all. Back at the apartment, the city hummed 19 floors below. Sung-ho poured 2 glasses of something amber and set one in front of her without asking. She took it. He sat at one end of the couch and she sat at the other, and the silence between them was full to the ceiling with everything that had happened in that corridor, and everything neither of them was saying about it. Taejun will make a direct move now, Sung-ho said. He has run out of indirect ones. She looked at her glass. And the person inside your organization, the one who helped him take the records. His jaw tightened. I am close to knowing who it is. She looked at him. Not at the situation. At him. At the man underneath there. Control. How long have you been doing this alone? She said. He looked at her, the question landing somewhere he had not expected. A long time, he said. She nodded. She looked at her glass. I know what that is, she said quietly. The doing it alone. The building everything yourself and trusting nobody, and keeping every single thing inside, because the alternative is showing someone where you are breakable. She paused. I did it for 3 years inside a situation that should have broken me, and I know what it costs. She looked at him. I know what it costs to carry everything by yourself. He was looking at her. The dark eyes. The crack in the wall that had appeared in the corridor was still there. Barely. But still there. The violin, he said. In my mother's room. She waited. She played alone too, he said, after my father left. She played every night for years. He looked at the window. I used to sit outside the door and listen. I didn't understand then what she was doing. He paused. I understand it now. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. At the streak of blonde. At the jaw. At the man underneath every carefully constructed surface that the world got to see. She stood. She walked to the door he had shown her. She opened it. She took the violin from its place against the wall, and she sat in the chair by the window, and she put it under her chin. Her hands were shaking slightly. 4 years. 4 years since she had held one. She closed her eyes, and she played. It was not perfect. Her fingers remembered, but they were rusty, and the first few notes were uncertain and tentative. The sound of someone finding a language they had almost forgotten they spoke. But then, something opened up. The way it always had. The way it always would. The most honest version of herself stepping back into the room. The music moved through the apartment, and Sung-ho sat on the couch and did not speak, and did not move, and listened the way he had listened outside his mother's door. Like the sound was saying something words could not get close to. She played for 10 minutes, maybe more. She did not count. When she stopped, the apartment held the silence the way a room holds a sound after it has ended, full of the shape of it. She opened her eyes. Sung-ho was looking at her from across the room. The wall was gone. Not cracked. Gone. His eyes were completely open and looking at her with everything in them. Everything he kept behind the control and the stillness and the carefully managed calm. She looked back at him. She did not look away. He stood. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her and she looked up at him. And he looked down at her. And the apartment was completely quiet. And Seoul was enormous and glittering through the window behind him. And neither of them said a single word. Because there were no words for what was in the room right now. There were no words that were adequate. There was only the two of them and the space between them that was almost. Nothing now, and his hand coming up to her face. Both hands, her face in his hands, his thumbs against her cheekbones. And his eyes on hers asking something that his voice had not said yet. She answered it. She leaned up and she kissed him. And he kissed her back. And it was not careful. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of two people who had been holding something back for days, with everything they had and had finally completely run out of reasons to keep holding. His hands in her hair. Her hands against his chest. The violin somewhere beside them forgotten. Seoul blazing through the windows behind them, indifferent and luminous and full of everything happening at once. He pulled back first. Just a breath. His forehead against hers. His eyes closed. Naomi, he said. Just her name. But the weight he placed in it, the specific gravity of those 4 syllables in his voice in that moment, carried everything neither of them had found language for yet. She pressed her hand, flat against his chest, against his heartbeat. It was not calm. She almost smiled. Neither am I, she said quietly. He opened his eyes. He looked at her. And for the first time since she had fallen into his car on a rain-soaked Seoul street, in a dress she wore to escape and not to arrive, John Sung-ho smiled. Real. Unguarded. The most human thing she had seen from him. And it lasted only a moment, and it was the most devastating thing in the room. Then his phone rang. He answered it. She watched the wall come back. Not all the way. Not the way it used to be, but enough. He spoke in Korean. Low and fast. His jaw tightened. When he hung up, his hand was still at her waist, like he hadn't decided to let go yet and was giving himself one more moment before the world required him to. I have to go, he said. She looked at him. Go. He looked at her with everything still visible in his eyes. Then he was gone, and the door closed and Naomi sat in the chair by the window with the violin in her, hands and soul burning through the glass, and her heart doing something she had given up on it ever doing again. Something she had no adequate defense against. Something she was not even sure anymore that she wanted to defend against. She thought about Taijun's eyes holding hers for 1 second at that table. The warmth in them. The specific quality of his attention. She thought about Sung-ho's hand on her shoulder arriving immediately after. The difference between seen and found. She already knew which one she was choosing. She lifted the violin back to her chin, and she played. She was still playing when everything changed. The violin was singing through the apartment, raw and honest, and more herself than anything she had managed in 4 years. And then the intercom cut through it like a blade. Sharp. 3 times. Insistent. Naomi lowered the violin slowly. The older woman appeared from the hallway. Her face had moved past its usual careful neutrality into something that looked very much like controlled urgency. She crossed to the window and looked down at the street 19 floors below. Then she looked at Naomi and said the only English word she had spoken since Naomi arrived. Men, she said. Naomi crossed to the window and looked down. 4 of them. On the wet Seoul street below. Not standing around. Positioned. 2 at the building entrance. 2 across the street facing up. The specific configuration of people who had been placed and not gathered. They were looking at the building. Her heart rate climbed. She stepped back from the window and called Sung-ho. He answered before the first ring finished. I see them, he said. Before she could speak. His voice was completely even. I am 12 minutes away. Do not open the door. Do not go near the windows. He paused. Are you frightened? She thought about lying. She thought about 3 years of performing calm for a man who used her fear against her. Yes, she said. Good, he said. Frightened means you are paying. Attention. 12 minutes. Do not move. The line stayed open. She could hear the sound of his car moving fast through the city. She held the phone against her ear and stood in the center of the living room and breathed. Then the intercom sounded again. 3 times. Then a voice through the speaker. Smooth, deliberate. English with the precision of a man who had learned it as a performance. Naomi, I know you are up there. His voice was warm, almost gentle. My name is Kwon Taijun. I think it is time we spoke without Sung-ho between us. He paused. I have something that belongs to you. Something from Lagos. I think you know what I mean. She went completely still. The drive. He was saying he had the drive. The recordings. Everything she had spent 8 months building. Everything that protected Chisholm. Her fingers tightened around the phone. He's at the intercom, she said quietly. I heard, Sung-ho said. His voice had not changed, but something underneath it had. 9 minutes. Do not respond. Do not engage. Naomi, Taejun's voice again through the speaker. I am not your enemy. Whatever Sung-ho has told you about me, I want you to consider the source. A man who pulls a woman into his war without her consent and calls it protection. She heard the smile in it. Does that sound familiar to you? Does that sound like someone you have met before? She pressed her lips together, because it was not nothing. The words were designed with precision. Designed by someone who understood exactly which wounds to press and at what angle. The comparison between Sung-ho and Emeka was wrong. She felt the difference between those 2 men in every cell of her body. But the words were crafted carefully. For her specifically. By someone who had done his research. Don't listen to him, Sung-ho said in her ear. He knows your history. He is using it. 8 minutes. She knew that. She knew exactly what Taijun was doing. But she also knew something else. Something that had been assembling itself quietly, since the corridor at the dinner, since the car ride home, since the morning in the kitchen when Sung-ho had laid out exactly how Taijun operated and exactly what he wanted. She knew his method. She knew his pressure points. She knew that he believed she was a vulnerability, Sung-ho's vulnerability, and that belief, that specific miscalculation, was the most useful thing in this entire situation if handled correctly. She had been a weapon pointed at people her whole life without knowing it. Tonight she was going to choose which direction the weapon faced. Sung-ho, she said. Don't, he said. I know what you are thinking. Don't. You don't know what I am thinking. I know exactly what you are thinking. 7 minutes. She looked at the intercom, at the speaker, at the voice of a man who thought she was a door he could walk through. She had spent 3 years being a door. Sung-ho, she said again. I need you to trust me. A silence. Short, loaded, the specific silence of a man fighting. Himself. Naomi. 5 minutes is too long, she said. If I engage him, I keep him here. I keep him talking. I buy you the time you need and I learn something while I do it. She paused. I know how to talk to men like him. I have been doing it my entire life. She paused again. Trust me. The silence on the other end was the most loaded she had heard from him yet. She could feel him fighting the instinct to say no. The instinct to protect. To keep her away from anything that could reach her. She could feel him understanding that she was right. If anything moves wrong, he said finally, I take the building apart. She almost smiled. It won't, she said. I won't let it. She walked to the intercom. She pressed the button. Mr. Kwon, she said. Her voice was warm, controlled. The voice of a woman who owned this moment completely. I appreciate you coming in person. That tells me you are serious. She paused. But if you want to talk to me, you will come upstairs, alone, and your men stay exactly where they are. A silence from the street below. Then a laugh. Genuine. Surprised. The laugh of a man who had not expected the door to talk back. You are not what I expected, he said. I never am, she said. Another pause. Then, I will come up alone. But Naomi, what I am bringing you is the truth. Whatever happens after that is your choice. She released the button. She stood straight. She looked at the older woman across the room who was watching her with an expression that had shifted entirely from careful neutrality into something that looked, for just a moment, like one woman recognizing another who understood exactly what it cost to be this steady when everything was shaking. The older woman nodded once. Naomi nodded back. She heard the elevator begin to ascend. 4 minutes, Sung-ho said in her ear. Moving fast. Keep him talking. Do not let him near the drive. And Naomi, yes, a pause. Brief. Unplanned. You are extraordinary, he said. Low and immediate and completely. Unguarded. Like it had moved past the wall before he could catch it. She pressed her lips together against what that did to her chest. 4 minutes, she said. Hurry. The elevator opened. Kwon Tae-jun stepped into the apartment alone and looked around the space with the automatic assessment of a man who read rooms the way other people read faces. Then his eyes found Naomi standing in the center of the living room, and she watched him recalibrate. He had expected to find her unsettled, frightened. A woman alone in someone else's apartment with men on the street below and no options she could see. He found her standing completely still and looking back at him with the clear, focused attention of a woman who was entirely in control of the moment she was standing in. The recalibration was visible. Subtle, but visible. She filed it. You said you have something of mine, she said. He reached into his jacket and produced a drive. Small. Black. She kept her face completely still. This was on Emeka. When my men searched him earlier tonight, he said. He held it between them. Do you know what is on it? Evidence, she said, of the people who arranged my life without my permission. He nodded slowly. He looked at the drive for a moment, then back at her. And do you know that the man who first arranged your connection to Emeka, the man who started all of this, is not me? She held his gaze. Keep talking, she said. He looked at her with an expression that had moved past performance into something more complicated. Something doing the work of honesty, even though honesty was not his default setting. There is someone inside Sung-ho's organization, he said. Someone feeding information in two directions. To me. And to the people who arranged your engagement in Lagos. He paused. I used what I was given. I am not pretending otherwise. But I did not start this. And the person who did is still in these walls. She looked at him steadily. Who? He held her gaze. Young, he said. The name hit her, chest like a stone into still water. Young. Sung-ho's most senior lieutenant. The man at Sung-ho's shoulder every single day since she arrived. The man trusted with movement schedules, internal communications, everything that only proximity and years of trust gave access to. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because I want this finished. He said it with the exhaustion of a man who had been carrying a war longer than he intended, and had arrived somewhere on the other side of wanting to keep carrying it. I took the records because I needed leverage. I used your arrival because it was useful. But I did not know what Emeka was, what he had done to you. He paused. When I found out, that was not something I agreed to. Using a woman's life as a weapon against her. That is not something I agreed to. She read him the way she had always read people, looking past the surface, looking for the gap between what was being performed and what was actually there underneath it. She found it in the specific discomfort in his jaw, in the way he held the drive, like something that had cost more than he had budgeted for. He was telling the truth, not all of it, but enough of it to matter. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a moment. Then he placed the drive in her palm. And then he did something she had not expected. He looked at her, directly, without the performance, without the warmth he deployed so fluently in rooms like the dinner. And he said something that had the specific weight of a man saying the true thing rather than the useful thing. You are wasted here, he said quietly. Not in Seoul. In this situation. In the position of someone else's protected asset. He paused. I have never met a woman who read a room the way you just read me. He held her gaze. Whatever Sung-ho is to you, make sure it is your choice. Make sure nobody pointed you in his direction the way they pointed Emeka at you. She looked at him. She felt it. The specific pull of his attention. The warmth of it. A man who looked at her like she was worth the real words rather than the performed ones. And she held it honestly in her hands for a moment, the way you hold something before you decide what to do with it. Then she heard the elevator. She put the drive in her pocket. The elevator opened. Sung-ho walked in. He crossed the room in 4 steps and stood beside Naomi and looked at Taijin with eyes that had gone to the specific quality of stillness, that meant a decision had been made and was simply waiting for the final confirmation before it became something irreversible. She put her hand on his arm before he could speak. He looked down at her, reading her immediately, taking the full reading. He told me who the traitor is, she said quietly. His jaw tightened. She held his gaze. Trust me, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. She felt the fight in him, the instinct against the understanding. She watched the understanding win, the way it always won with him when she was the one asking. He looked at Taijun. Young, he said, his voice very quiet. Taijun nodded once. Something moved across Sung-ho's face. Not surprise. The specific pain of a confirmation. The difference in weight between suspecting someone you trusted and knowing it with certainty. The kind of knowing that does not go back to what it was before. Naomi kept her hand on his arm. She held her position beside him and let him feel without words, and without performance, that he was not carrying this alone. That she was here. His hand came over hers, his fingers closing over hers briefly. One moment of contact that said everything it needed to say. Then he looked at Taijin, with the clean, decisive finality of a man closing a chapter that had been open too long. Get out of my apartment, he said. Taijin moved toward the elevator. At the elevator, he turned back. The records, he said. I will return all of them, in exchange for a real conversation. 2 men who are capable of ending this without destroying everything around them. He paused. I am tired of the war. I think you are too. Sung-ho looked at him for a long moment. Tomorrow, he said. My terms. My location. Taijin nodded once. Then he looked at Naomi. One final look. Not strategic. Not performed. Just honest. The look of a man who had walked into a room planning one thing and had something else happen entirely, and had the self-awareness to recognize it. Take care of yourself, he said to her. Not him. Her. Then the elevator closed. The apartment went silent. Naomi let out a slow breath. Sunko stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he turned and looked at her, and the full weight of everything he had been carrying in that car for 12 minutes pressed forward in his expression all at once. You let him in, he said, his voice quiet, not accusing, but something underneath it that was not calm. I kept him here until you arrived, she said. I got the drive back, and I got the name you needed. She paused, and I learned something else. He looked at her. What? She met his eyes. He warned me, she said, about being pointed in directions without my knowledge, about making sure my choices are actually mine. She held Sungho's gaze steadily. He said that to me. Taijin said that to me. Something moved through Sungho's expression, complex, layered. She held his gaze. I am telling you that because I want you to know that I hear it. I have been moved around this board my whole life by people who called it care. She paused. So I need you to know that I am standing here beside you because I am choosing to. Not because I was pointed. Not because I am grateful. Because I am choosing to. She looked at him directly. Do you understand the difference? He looked at her for a long time. Something working through him. Then he crossed the room to her in 3 steps and his hands came to her face. And he kissed her. Not carefully. Not gently. The kiss of a man who had just been told something that mattered enormously and was answering it the only way that was adequate. His hands on her face, her hands gripping the front of his jacket, both of them present and choosing and completely without reservation. He pulled back, his forehead against hers, eyes closed, breathing harder than she had ever heard from him. I understand, he said, his voice low and rough, every word of it. She pressed her hand flat against his chest, his heartbeat under her palm, fast, present, real. Good, she said quietly. He opened his eyes and looked at her, and for the second time she saw the real smile. Brief, devastating, entirely his. Then he made 3 calls, each brief, each final. Young would be collected before morning. Everything he had passed would be mapped and contained. And Emika, still in Seoul, would be found. I am going to handle Emika tonight, he said, when he hung up the last call. She looked at him. This one is mine, he said quietly. This one is personal. She saw it clearly. Not control. Not Emika's kind of management dressed in concern. This was a man who had watched a bruise forming on her wrist in the back of his car and had been carrying the image of it since the moment he saw it. Who needed to stand in front of the person responsible and deliver something no one else could deliver for him? She understood. She nodded. He cupped her face in both hands. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he kissed her forehead. Slow. His lips against her skin with the tenderness of a man who did not do tenderness lightly. Then he was gone. She sat in the living room with the drive in her hand, and Seoul humming below, and she waited. They found Emeka at a hotel in Itaewon, 7th floor, end of the corridor. Sunko went in with 4 men and the specific focused calm of a person who had been waiting to deliver this particular message, since the moment he had watched a bruise forming on a woman's wrist in the dark of his back seat. Emika's 2 guards were positioned in the corridor. The first one saw Sungho's men coming and reached inside his jacket and received the back of a forearm against his throat before his hand cleared the fabric. He hit the wall and went down in a heap that did not move. The second one was faster. He got a punch off, wide, poorly aimed, and Sungho stepped inside it without breaking stride, and 2 strikes, precise and deliberate and completely without wasted movement, put the man on the floor where he sat and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what day it was. Then Sungho stood in front of Emeka's hotel room door, alone. He knocked. The door opened. Emeka stood in the doorway with the composed, controlled surface of a man who had spent his entire life being the most dangerous person in any room he entered. He looked at Sungho. He looked at the two shapes on the corridor floor behind him. He looked back at Sungho. Something moved across his face. Fast. Involuntary. "You made a mistake coming here," Emeka said, his voice controlled. The last performance of a man with nothing left to perform with. Sungho looked at him. He said nothing. He simply stepped forward. What happened in that hotel room was not long. It was not chaotic. It was efficient and precise and conducted entirely without raised voices. When it was finished, Emeka was against the wall with the specific expression of a man who had just been shown the full distance between who he believed he was and who he actually was. Sungho crouched in front of him. He spoke for exactly 90 seconds. Low. Even. Looking directly at Emeka throughout. He said what needed to be said about what happened in the back of a car in the rain. About a woman's wrist. About what it cost to follow someone 12,000 kilometers and call it love. He did not raise his voice once. He did not need to. When he stood and walked out of that room, Emeka did not move. He sat against the wall and the composed surface was completely and entirely gone, and what was underneath. It was something small and frightened that he had spent years making other people feel, so he would not have to feel it himself. He was at Incheon Airport before midnight, on a flight to Lagos before 2. And somewhere on the 19th floor of a building in Gangnam, the wire that had been pulled tight in Naomi's chest for 3 years began, slowly, quietly, in careful stages, to go slack. He walked back into the apartment at 2 in the morning. She heard the elevator before she saw him. She had been sitting in the chair by the window with the violin in her lap, and Seoul humming below. The specific taut quiet of a woman waiting for news she needed, but was not sure she was ready to receive. Then he was there. She looked at him from across the room, at the streak of blonde, at the tattoos, at the set of his jaw and the state of his knuckles and the specific quality of the stillness around him that told her everything before he said a word. "Is it done?" she said. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet, completely even. She nodded. She set the violin down. She stood up. And then she looked at him, really looked at him, and something moved through her that she had not expected. Not relief, not gratitude. Something rawer than both of those things. Something that 3 years of being afraid and 1 long night of waiting in a Seoul apartment and watching a man walk out a door to handle something on her behalf had produced in her chest that she had no clean name for. Her eyes filled. She looked away immediately. She heard him cross the room, his footsteps stopping in front of her. He put 2 fingers under her chin and tilted her face back toward his. She let him. "Hey," he said, quietly, the softest she had ever heard from him. "Look at me." She looked at him, her eyes bright, her jaw held tight against everything trying to come through it. "It is finished," he said, his thumb at her jaw. Steady, present. "I need you to hear that. It is finished." "I know," she said, her voice smaller than she intended. "I know that. I just—" She stopped. He waited. "I have been frightened for so long," she said. She pressed her lips together. "For so long that I don't know what it feels like when it stops. I don't know what to do with my body when there is nothing left to be afraid of." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her into him, his arms coming around her completely, her face pressing into his chest, his hand at the back of her head, holding her the way you hold someone through something rather than away from it. She pressed her hands against his back, and she cried. She cried quietly and completely in the arms of a man who did not try to talk her out of it, who did not say shh, or it is okay, or don't cry, who just held her and let her feel the full weight of what 3 years and 12,000 kilometers, and 1 right car on 1 right night had cost, and what it had delivered. She cried until she was finished, then she was still. His hand moved slowly, against her hair, his heart beat under her cheek, steady, present, unchanging. She stepped back and looked up at him. He looked back at her. The wall completely gone. His eyes soft in a way she knew he did not show anyone, and had not decided to show her. It had simply arrived because she was the person standing in front of him, and it had nowhere else to go. Stay tonight, he said, not the guest room. She looked at him. She was quiet for a moment. You should know, she said carefully, that I am not someone who stays because I feel like I owe something. I know that, he said. And I am not staying because I am grateful or because I am frightened or because this is the safest place available to me. He held her gaze. I know that too. Then why am I staying, she said. His eyes, the streak of blonde, the jaw, the man underneath everything the world got to see. Because you want to, he said simply, and because I want you to. He paused. That is the only reason that is worth anything. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she took his hand, and he walked her down the hallway. The room was dark, and the city threw long bars of light through the curtains, and Seoul was enormous and luminous through the windows. He sat at the edge of the bed, and she stood in front of him, and he looked up at her with everything in his eyes that he had been keeping behind the wall since the night she fell into his car. She reached for him, and he reached for her. What followed was quiet and honest and careful, in the way of two people who had both been broken before and were not going to rush something that mattered this much. He was gentle in a way that surprised her and should not have surprised her, because he had been gentle from the beginning, in all the ways that counted, in all the ways that Amika had never understood the meaning of. She pressed her palm against the tattoos on his chest, and felt his heartbeat under her hand, and thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. This is what it is supposed to be. Later she lay in the dark beside him, and he lay on his back, and the city threw its light slowly across the ceiling, and she traced the tattoos on his forearms with her fingers in the quiet. His breathing was slow, his hand warm over hers. She did not sleep for a while, not because she was afraid, not because her mind was running with anything that needed solving, because she wanted to stay awake inside this, because she wanted to feel every second of it, because she had spent 3 years not knowing if she would ever feel safe enough in anyone's presence to simply be still. And she was still now, completely. And she wanted to feel every single second of what that was like before sleep took it from her. His voice came quietly from the dark. What are you thinking? She smiled. She had not known he was still awake. She looked at the city light on the ceiling. I am thinking, she said quietly, that I ran 12,000 kilometers and ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. A silence. Then his arm came around her and he pulled her closer, and she settled against his side, and his chin came down to the top of her head. Yes, he said, you did. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, she slept without watching the ceiling, without listening for sounds she had learned to be afraid of, without any part of her standing guard against the night. She simply slept. In the morning, the light came through the curtains pale and clean, and Naomi woke to the sound of Seoul waking up below, and the warmth of him beside her, and the specific quiet of an apartment that felt, completely and without apology, like home. She turned her head. He was already awake, lying still, looking at the light changing at the ceiling. She watched him from the pillow for a moment before he knew she was watching. He looked different in this light, younger, like she could see the man who existed before whoever had made the walls necessary. She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. He turned his head and looked at her, his eyes soft in the morning light, the streak of blonde catching it, the jaw relaxed in the way it almost never was outside of this room. He reached over and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face. Such a small thing, such a deliberate, specific, gentle thing. She felt it everywhere. And then his phone rang. He looked at it. His expression shifted in the way she had learned to read, the specific tightening around his eyes that meant the information coming in was not good. He answered. He spoke in Korean, fast and low. She watched his face. She watched his jaw set. He hung up. She sat up. What is it? He looked at her. Taejun, he said. He sent word this morning. The Yongsan meeting is still on, but he has a condition. He wants you in the room. She stared at him. He wants you there specifically, Sungho said. He says the conversation only happens with you present. He paused. He trusts you. He doesn't trust me. He believes if you are in the room, the agreement holds. She looked at him. And you? His jaw was tight. I do not like it. That is not what I asked. He held her gaze. I think he is right, he said finally. I think you are the reason this ends instead of continues. He paused. I do not like it, and I think it is true. She looked at him, at the streak of blonde in the morning light, at the man who had just admitted she was necessary to something he had spent 2 years trying to resolve entirely alone. Then get me into that room, she said. He looked at her. Something moved through his expression. The specific acknowledgement of a man who had spent 12 years handling everything himself and was learning, slowly because of this specific person, what it meant to let someone stand beside him instead of behind him. He picked up his phone. The Yongsan meeting was in a private room above a building that belonged to neither of them. Neutral ground, a table, chairs. The records in a sealed case that Taijun had brought and placed on the table before anyone sat down. All of them returned. Every document. Without condition. Before the conversation even started. Sung-ho acknowledged it with one nod. No other visible reaction. But Naomi felt the shift in him beside her. The specific shift of a man receiving something he had not been certain would arrive. Taejin looked at Naomi when they walked in. You came, he said. She sat down across from him. Sung-ho sat beside her, his shoulder touching hers. Let us finish this, she said. What followed was 2 hours of the most careful, loaded conversation Naomi had ever been inside. 2 men dismantling a war one truth at a time, laying down what they had each been carrying and looking at it in the light. She said very little. She did not need to. She watched. She listened. She read every room beneath the room, every real conversation happening underneath the performed one, every real fear hiding behind the strategic one. And twice. Exactly twice. When the conversation hit a wall and both men went quiet, and the room tightened with 2 years of pride, pressing up against 2 years of pride, and neither of them could find the way through it. She said one thing. One quiet, specific, accurate thing that named what was actually happening underneath the impasse, without dressing it up in anything else. Both times the conversation found its way forward. After the second time, Taejin looked at her across the table. This war would have ended a year ago, he said quietly. If you had been in the room. She held his gaze. Yes, she said simply. It would have. Sung-ho looked at her from the side. She felt the look. The streak of blonde in her peripheral vision. The specific quality of the attention. She pressed her knee against his under the table. His hand found hers immediately. His fingers closing over hers in the specific quiet way of a man who had stopped pretending that what he felt was anything other than what it was. By the time they walked out of that room, the Cold War between John Sung-ho and Kwon Taejin had not become a warm one. But it had become something that had the shape, early and fragile and requiring careful handling on both sides, of a permanent ending. Not quite peace, but the door to it, opened for the first time in 2 years. On the Yongsan street outside, Sung-ho stopped walking. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at her with the full open expression that had nothing behind it because there was no wall left to put anything behind. What? She said. He shook his head slightly, in the way of a man who has just finished processing something large. You walked into that room, he said quietly, and you ended a 2-year war in 2 hours. She looked at him. I had good material to work with, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed the space between them and kissed her. Right there on the Yongsan street in the afternoon light with Seoul moving around them in every direction and nobody stopping for anything. His hands on her face, her hands gripping the front of his jacket, the streak of blonde catching the light above her. A taxi honked somewhere to their left. Neither of them moved. When they separated, she was slightly breathless and not pretending otherwise. He looked at her. She looked at him. She laughed. The full, unguarded kind. The kind that arrived before she had decided whether to let it. He smiled. The real one. Brief and devastating and entirely his. They walked back to the car with his hand in hers, and Seoul going on being Seoul around them, enormous and indifferent and full of everything. That evening she told him she needed to go back to Lagos. They were on the couch, the city going orange through the windows, her legs folded beneath her, his arm around her. The specific warmth of two people who had stopped pretending they were not exactly where they wanted to be. He went still when she said it. She felt it. The specific quality of his stillness when something arrived that he did not want to accept. "Chisholm," she said, "I have to go. I should have gone before I ran. I have been carrying her since the moment I landed in this city. She is 19 years old and she is still in that house, and my father is already moving." She paused. "I have to go before he does. How long? A week? Maybe 2. He looked at the city through the windows, his jaw doing the tight thing. She watched him working through it, the instinct against the understanding. She had watched him have this exact fight with himself enough times now to know how it ended. "I will send 2 men," he said finally. She leaned up and kissed the corner of his jaw softly. "2 men," she agreed. He turned and looked at her directly, his eyes serious in the specific personal way that was different from his professional serious. "I need to say something," he said. She waited. He looked at her. He said it the way he said everything, quietly, without arrangement or performance, directly. "I have not let anyone in," he said, "in a long time." He looked at the city briefly, then back at her. "I had reasons, good ones, built over years." He held her gaze steadily. "You made all of them feel insufficient." He paused. "Every careful thing I had decided about myself, you made it feel insufficient. I want you to know that. Before you go, I want you to know what you did." She looked at him for a long moment. She felt the full weight of it in her chest. What it cost a man like this to say something like that. What it required him to put down to say it. She put her hand on the side of his face. "I know," she said softly, "because you did the same thing to me." He turned his face slightly into her hand. His eyes closed for just a moment. She kissed him, slow and thorough, and with the specific honesty of 2 people who are both saying something they have not said before, and mean every single syllable of it. He kissed her back the same way, his arms pulling her closer, her hand in his hair, the streak of blonde between her fingers finally exactly where she had wanted it since the first night in the car. She pressed herself into him, and he held her, and they stayed like that while the city went dark outside the windows, and neither of them counted the time, because neither of them was in any hurry to let the moment end. Later, she lay with her head on his chest, and his arm around her and his heartbeat under her ear, and she looked at the city through the windows. "I am coming back," she said quietly. "I know," he said. She lifted her head and looked at him. "Do you?" He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "I know." She held his gaze. He reached up and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face. The same small, deliberate gesture that had undone her every single time he did it. She pressed her lips to his jaw, his cheek, the streak of blonde at his temple. He closed his eyes. She settled back against his chest, and they lay there in the dark, while Seoul kept shining through the windows, and the violin sat in the chair, in the side room, and everything that had been broken was slowly and quietly and completely finding its way back to the shape it was always supposed to have. She left the next morning. He walked her to the elevator, his 2 men already downstairs with the car, her bag over her shoulder, the drive in the lining, its purpose about to be fulfilled. They stood at the elevator and he looked at her. 7 days, she said. He looked at her. She put her hand flat on his chest, under her palm his heartbeat, strong and steady and present. 7 days, she said again. He covered her hand with his fingers closing over hers, holding her hand against his own heartbeat for a long moment, long enough for her to feel every beat of it. Then he pulled her to him and kissed her. Not a gentle goodbye, a real one. The kind that said everything that 7 days of distance made urgent to say before it became distance. His hand in her hair, her grip on the front of his shirt, both of them giving and receiving without holding anything back. When they separated, she was breathing harder than she had intended to be. His forehead pressed to hers. "Come back," he said, his voice low. She pulled back and looked at him. That, she said, is not something you ever have to ask me. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. She pressed her back against the elevator wall and pressed her hand flat over her own chest, and felt her own heartbeat and thought about his heartbeat under her palm upstairs, and breathed through the distance that had just begun. 7 days. She played the violin every day in Lagos. In the small room at the back of her cousin's house, where she and Chisholm stayed while she handled everything that needed handling. She played in the mornings before Chisholm woke up and the music moved through the small house. And she thought about an apartment on the 19th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and a man who had said pick it back up like it was simply and obviously and completely true. She sent him a message on the 3rd day. I am playing, she wrote. His reply came in under a minute. I know, he wrote. I can hear it from here. She stared at that message for a long time. Then she smiled and went back to playing. On the 6th day, she got Chisholm out of the family house. It was not simple. It was not without cost. There were conversations that required everything she had, and one moment in her father's sitting room, where the full weight of what had been done to both of his daughters, in the name of love and propriety, sat in the air between them, and neither of them looked away from it. She did not shout. She did not perform. She said the true things in the order they needed to be said, and she said them clearly, and she did not arrange them into anything softer than what they were. Her father looked at her afterward with an expression she had never seen from him before. She did not wait to name it. She took Chisholm's hand and she walked out. 7 days later, the elevator opened. Naomi came through it with Chisholm beside her, 19 years old, eyes wide, holding her bag in both hands and looking at Seoul through the apartment windows, with the expression of a person seeing an open road for the very first time in her life. Sung-ho was in the living room. He stood when the elevator opened. He looked at Naomi. The full look, reading her, checking her, finding her whole and steady and more completely herself than when she had left. Something in him released, visibly. The specific release of 7 days of carefully managed distance finally ending completely. She crossed the room. He met her halfway. He kissed her immediately, both hands on her face. No waiting. No managing. No distance left between them at all. Just immediately, completely. All of it. The kiss of a man who had been waiting 7 days and had finished waiting. She kissed him back with everything she had. Her hands on his chest. Her whole body leaning into the specific warmth of the only person she had run 12,000 kilometers and found. From across the room, Chisholm made a sound somewhere between shock and pure delight. They broke apart. Naomi laughed, the full, unguarded laugh, the one that had been missing for 3 years and was back now, and was never leaving again. Never being put down again. Not for anyone. Sung-ho looked at her laughing, the streak of blonde catching the apartment light, the jaw soft, the dark eyes completely open and warm and entirely present. He looked at Chisholm. She stays, he said simply, as long as she needs. Chisholm looked at him, then at Naomi, then back at him with the complete and total expression of a 19-year-old who had just understood in full what her sister had found on the other side of 12,000 kilometers of running, and was giving it her absolute and complete approval. Naomi crossed back to Sung-ho and put her hand flat on his chest. Under her palm, his heartbeat. Still there, she said quietly. He put his hand over hers. Always, he said. She looked up at him. The streak of blonde, the tattoos, the jaw, the man underneath everything the world got to see who had been standing at an elevator for 7 days and had been here before that and would be here after, and was not going anywhere. She kissed him softly. He kissed her back. And Seoul kept being Seoul outside those floor-to-ceiling windows. Enormous and luminous and indifferent and full of everything. Not knowing and not caring what it had made possible. Not knowing what had started in the back of one black car on one rain-soaked Thursday night. And what had been built slowly and carefully and honestly, at considerable cost in the 19 floors between its streets, and one apartment where the light came in long bars through the curtains, and a violin sat in a chair by the window, and 3 people were learning what it felt like to put the weight down, what it felt like to stop running, what it felt like to arrive. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know what it cost her to get here. A family that loved a version of her more than they loved her. An engagement she never agreed to in her bones. 12,000 kilometers of running. And one car she was never supposed to get into. That turned out to be exactly where her life was waiting. Some of you watching this are in the middle of your own version of that journey. Maybe nobody forced you into a dress. But something was decided for you, without you, by people who called it love. And you are still finding your way out of it. You are not at the ending yet, but you left. Or you are leaving. Or you are standing at the door right now gathering everything you have. And that matters more than you know. Drop your city in the comments. Let us see where Naomi's story traveled today. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that running toward yourself is never the wrong's direction. And subscribe. Because every week we come back here and we tell stories about women who choose themselves. Even when the choosing is terrifying. Even when the city is foreign. Even when the only thing they carried with them was the truth they refused to leave behind. Naomi did. And so can you.